This may be somewhat of a contentious subject. However, it is my humble opinion that playing as the Wood Elves with Orion and his faction Talysn, the God King of Athel Loren, is the most powerful legendary lord and faction on the Immortal Empires map. And the reason why I'm going to say this, there's a number of reasons why I'm going to say this. So this particular campaign, we're a little over 100 turns. I think it's turn 113. And as you can see, we're cruising along fairly well. But on top of that, this was a challenge campaign. So we were playing This Is Total War and Ultimate Endgame Crisis at the maximum strength of the Endgame Crisis. And despite the fact that Orion's starting area has numerous Endgame Crises nearby, we were able to handle this. I don't want to say with relative ease, but we were able to handle this using the faction traits to our advantage. And I'm going to break it down exactly why I believe Talysn with Orion is the strongest faction in the game. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, Khorne, or maybe one of the Skaven factions. I could potentially argue one of the High Elf factions, or maybe even Torox's faction is the strongest. But I don't think so. I think Orion has just got it in spades, and I got to tell you exactly why. So the first thing, so faction effects. God King of Athel Loren. Orion is the king of Athel Loren and consort of the Mage Queen Ariel. Although all elves are long-lived, he is immortal, calling the Wild Hunt each year in defense of the sacred forest. So enables the Wild Hunt event, which is a solid event. It gives, a number of bonuses to all of the characters who are assigned to the Wild Hunt, which is nice. It's not, anything, over the top, but it is a nice little bonus to get. But this is the next two traits are what really makes his faction so strong. Is upkeep cost minus 8% for Orion's army for each active war, and upkeep cost minus 4% for all other armies for each active war. So if you are in a lot of wars, you can reduce your upkeep cost to 0. Which, a lot of people, people might argue, well, I don't fail to see the advantage of being in multiple wars. And yeah, fair enough. However, you don't necessarily have to, declare war on everyone. This, was a particular challenge. This was a challenge campaign doing This Is Total War. So it lends perfectly to a This Is Total War campaign, obviously. Makes it, that challenge, a lot more viable. For a player like myself who might struggle quite a bit normally in a This Is Total War challenge campaign. However, if you're just playing a normal campaign, you don't have to exploit this to its maximum. But as the campaign drags on, as you get into more and more wars, it reduces your upkeep costs, and you can really push the limits of that, and it'll really help you along in taking on multiple wars at a time. So really, really strong trait there. Anytime you can reduce your upkeep cost all the way down to 0, it's, incredibly powerful. And then the final trait there is campaign movement range plus 50% in the world route stance. So again, this is an excellent trait. It's, it's nothing necessarily completely overpowered, but it just gives your armies that little bit more mobility. The very fact that you can use the world route stance, which not all the factions can, gives you flexibility, but the fact that you have an additional 50% in the world routes stance is just really, really amazing. So very nice traits there. So great faction traits, very strong. The next thing that we're going to look at is climates. Suitable climate everywhere. I cannot understate the value of this. To be able to settle anywhere and everywhere is just such a fantastic trait to have. Yeah, cannot say enough good things about that. Now, that leads us to settlements. So a lot of people will say, well, big weakness of the Wood Elves is that they can't really build up any of the other settlements outside of the main magical forest. So, what I would say to this is that what appears to be a disadvantage at first, you can actually turn into a strong advantage. So, these are going to be your fortresses. Obviously, you're going to want to defend them to the last man, defend them to the death. However, these minor settlements essentially you're going to use the terrain to your advantage. And what I mean by that is as you expand, you can expand very quickly. All of these settlements will be high value to your enemies. However, they're low value to you. So you don't necessarily have to defend them. So you can expand quickly, take a lot of settlements, allow your enemies to retake them. But when they retake them, they won't be worth the same value as they were previously. And you can take a wide area of terrain, let an invasion, for example, if there was an invasion coming in through here, we let the invasion come in, and eventually it's going to run out of steam. We'll counter it and then retake the territory. It's just as simple as that. So, what appears as a disadvantage at first, you can turn that into a strong advantage. So, obviously your economy is not going to be as strong with these minor settlements, but again, because of the reduction in upkeep cost, it's just super powerful. A super powerful faction. All right, the next thing is start location. So Orion starts at the King's Glade, and he also starts with the Oak of Ages. And this is one of the most defensible areas of the game, or at least Athel Loren itself is one of the most defensible areas of the game. I could go into great detail of just the different aspects and the different dimensions of the defensive capabilities of this area, but it's just an extremely difficult place to take, and anyone who's marched their armies into the Wood Elf domain will know exactly what I'm talking about, even though you don't get actual siege maps to defend these settlements. You can load them up with strong garrisons, and so long as you keep some armies to defend them, it's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for your enemies to get in here. So excellent starting position as well, which leads us into the next area is confederations. So confederations can be really tricky in Warhammer 3. I felt like confederating was in a good place with Warhammer 2, that you had like a lot of tools at your disposal to do the confederations, but it seems a little bit more finicky in Warhammer 3 depending on which faction you're playing as. And if you're playing as Orion, you get missions to do the confederations. So every time you level up the Oak of Ages, it will unlock confederation missions. So the first level unlocks confederation missions with Torgovin, Widrioth. Next level is Aguilin, Talysn, and Heralds of Ariel. And so by the time you get this to level 3, you have missions for all the other Wood Elf factions, and just completing those missions allows you to confederate with them. So that was actually one of the things that really saved this campaign. So when the ultimate endgame crisis hit, it hit around turn 13. So what we did in order to sort of mitigate the damage of the endgame crisis and grow stronger at the same time was we were able to upgrade the Oak of Ages to level 2 before the endgame crisis struck, and we had time to complete one of the missions for Confederation. So we were able to complete the mission for Torgovin, and so we timed it so that we had the mission. We just had to do one more battle for the mission, and we set it up so that we could complete that mission once the endgame crisis hit. And then when the endgame crisis did hit, we fought that battle, completed the mission, and then were actually able to confederate one of the Endgame Crisis armies. So the only unfortunate thing was Torgovan only got 2 armies for the Endgame Crisis, but you know, turned something into obviously a huge weakness in, you know, the Endgame Crisis. The Wood Elves are one of the Endgame Crisis. All of the Wood Elves armies get additional armies. But the only downside was that they only received 2 armies. However, those 2 armies were crucial in completing this campaign. So there you have it. Like, having actual missions to do the confederations, very strong as well. So the next thing I guess we'll talk about is the unit roster.
Lord of Athel, Loren.
And recruitment. So if we take a look,
Glade Lord, at your service.
well, we'll start with the lords, the legendary lords. You just got a really great variety of legendary lords. I mean, Treeman, these guys are just solid tanks, solid holding the line, great, you know, really powerful magic. We'll get into magic here shortly as well, and then of course the you know, the spell weavers, all very versatile as well, you know, depending on what situations you want to use them in. These can be really, really useful. And then the Glade Lords and, you know, the 2 different Glade Lords are, you know, solid units, you know, nothing, you know, too crazy. But with the Talon of Kurnos, range plus 15% army, obviously, as the Wood Elves, if you want to go down the archer route for your armies, this is, you know, excellent. And the fact that they can be mounted on either eagles or green dragons, very, very good as well. And so let's take a look at the roster a little bit. We won't go into too much detail, but the roster is one of the more rounded rosters, I think, in Warhammer. You know, they're arguably the fastest faction on the map. Maybe Zinch might be faster than them. However, they do have a lot of speed in field battles. They're going to be very, very strong. And that speed really comes in handy in siege maps as well. Even though you don't have artillery, I feel like artillery would just slow you down as the Wood Elves. So it's really not all that necessary. But I mean, you got your standard spears, and then of course you've got your war dancers and wildwood rangers, blade singers. So I mean, infantry wise, nothing crazy, but again, like I said, very fast units. I mean, the spares can hold the line. Most of these units will be just basically used in garrison, but yeah, they are what they are. And then of course you got your Glade captain, pretty standard, well-rounded hero. And then if we go with the archers, some of the best archers in the game, obviously playing as the Wood Elves. Not a big fan of the Deepwood Scouts. However, the Glade Guard with poison tips and the Glade Guard with Starfire shafts are both very, very useful. Obviously, poison is great, and then the Starfire shafts actually have quite strong armor piercing missile damage 18. So for a tier 1 unit, 18 missile damage. I mean, you do have to do a secondary building to add them. However, for a tier 1 unit to have 18 missile piercing is quite strong. Your Waystalker, basically the Waystalkers are going to be your campaign agents, your scouts, your assassins, things like that. Really good campaign agent in that regard, but not an agent you're going to use a whole lot in your armies. And then of course you've got your Way Watchers, one of the top tier archer units in the game. You could argue that they are potentially the best archer unit, but I mean, there's 1 or 2 archer units that may have them beat. But at the same time, you know, the fact that they have stock, the fact that they have huge armor piercing, and yeah, just an excellent archer unit. These guys are so strong. going to be useful in a number of scenarios. And of course, we go down the line with the trees. The dryads, meh. I mean, they're good for, you know, plugging holes and whatnot. You know, you find them in the garrisons and whatnot. Nothing, you know, too crazy there. The treekin, good solid tier 3 unit. These are great for bogging down enemy lines. They can really tank a fair bit of damage. Leadership, bit of an issue at times, but you know, overall, very solid unit. The Zotes, more of a specialty unit, but they can definitely provide some muscle, some support for you. And then, of course, you've got your Treemen, which are, you know, Doomstack tier army. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily one of the top Doomstacks. However, you know, they are, you know, in combination with the Lore of Life, very strong, very, very tanky. You know, they deal damage fairly slowly, but they can tank a lot of damage. And like I said, with the Lore of Life, you know, very viable Doomstack. And then, of course, we do also have some flying units. So this is where you get a lot more of your speed. Oh, we're going to cover the cavalry as well. We'll go back to the cavalry. So Great Eagle. These have their uses. I mean, you know, they're good for taking out artillery and stuff, and harassing units, things like that. The fact that they're fast, you know, they have their uses. But I mean, tier 2 unit, you know, gonna struggle with them at times. Hawk Riders, they're a little bit flimsy, but I've found that they're very good at taking out skirmish units. If you crash in, charge into, you know, they do have that a little bit of a charge bonus, so they can get a little bit of work done. The fact that they have an animation when they're charging in can really scatter ranged units and things like that. And the fact that their leadership is relatively low means that when they do get into trouble, they will break and get off the field. The fact that they're fast, so you know, will usually get them out of trouble in time. So you know, I typically use these somewhat recklessly to take out skirmishers and things like that. Their speed and, you know, that little bit of charge really comes in handy. Can't really do a whole lot of damage with the missiles, but you know, you can do a little bit of harassment and things like that if you want to keep them in the air and use the archers. So they definitely do have their uses, but once you get into the late game, probably not going to be using them a lot. And then the Green Dragon, probably, or I guess, sorry, Forest Dragon. I don't know. In D&D mode with Baldur's Gate 3 coming out, I'm thinking Green Dragons. But the Forest Dragon, probably, I would say, maybe one of the more underrated dragons in the game. So they're the squishiest dragon. However, they're the fastest dragon. And because of that speed, it gives them a lot more versatility. There's more uses. You can get to artillery quicker. You can get to skirmishers quicker. You can support other units more quickly. So, you know, you can do hit and runs are more viable when, you know, swoop in, drop your breath down, and then swoop out. They can dodge enemy archer fire, skirmisher fire, things like that a lot easier because of that speed. So I feel like the speed makes them one of the more underrated dragons. And then let's get into the cavalry. So cavalry has come a long way since Warhammer 2. I feel like it's a lot more viable in the newer game in Warhammer 3. So, you know, even these Glade Riders in Orion's army, get a bit of use out of them. You know, they're going to be really squishy, so somewhat expendable, but their speed is what makes them really strong. And then the poison-tipped archers definitely have their uses as well. And then we get a little bit, you know, just basically a stronger version of the Glade Riders with the Wild Riders. And again, you know, very fast, hard-hitting cavalry. These guys are shielded, so they'll be able to tank a little bit. And then you've got one of the more versatile cavalry units in the game. Sisters of the Thorn. They've got the couple of bound spells, and they've got the ranged weapon. They've got poison. So very, very useful cavalry unit here. And then the Great Stag Knights. These guys are solid. I do like using them, and especially with Orion, his specialty giving cavalry a bonus, they're going to be really strong. They're not as good, obviously, as the Bretonian top tier cav, the oh gosh, I can't even, the Grail Guardians, Grail Knights, Grail Guardians. They're not quite as good as the Grail Guardians, but a similar, they function very similar to those in that, it's a 32 units, unit models. They're big units. They hit hard. They push a lot of units around and things like that. They're obviously not going to tank as well, but very similar to those. But I mean, in summary, you want to really make use of the entirety of the roster and mix it up. I mean, you can definitely go down just one direction, just speed to treatment and just go all out with doom stacks or whatever. However, I find that somewhat of a boring strategy. The battles that you're going to be fighting, it's just are going to be mind-numbingly boring. I've been finding that treatment mixed with some dragons actually works really well, because you can use the Lore of Life to heal both of them, and the dragons just give the trees support, are able to take out artillery, range units, things like that. And then as units blob in around the treeman, you got those breath attacks to really burn them down. So I feel like you get the most out of the treeman if you pair them with a few dragons and things like that. And of course, you got your cavalry to mix in. Cavalry mixed with a bit of Way Watchers can be really effective, or you can go the balanced route and use Wildwood Rangers or Blade Singers mixed with some Way Watchers and some cavalry. A lot of different options. And then we didn't talk about the Spell Singers, but Spell Singers just pretty standard spell casters and stuff. So that's your unit roster. Really strong in field battles and deceptively strong in siege attacks as well because of their speed. Siege defenses, you just want to take advantage of numbers. You want to make sure that you build up your garrisons and have armies protecting these areas, because obviously if you lose your magical forests, you're going to be in trouble. All right, next thing I want to talk about is raising settlements. So I guess I should have mentioned this earlier when we were talking about the settlements, but just briefly, you get so much cash from raising settlements that it's just it's another added benefit of playing as this faction, that you get that additional money from raising settlements. And then we should talk about the Lore of Life. So Lore of Life, obviously your most powerful, or one of the most powerful lores of magic, just super strong. And the Wood Elves, it really comes in handy with the Wood Elves because they have so many, again, going back to the unit roster, so many creatures and units that will take advantage of Lore of Life, that get bonuses from Lore of Life. So it's super strong. And the other thing with the Wood Elves as well is that the after battle options, take on captives, I think gives you additional replenishment, but on top of that, it increases your winds of magic. So if you're using that, if you're taking that option oftentimes your armies will have huge reserves of winds of magic, which again, very, very strong. You shouldn't really run into situations where your armies are low on winds of magic. You should be capped out at 100 in most situations. So winds of magic, incredibly powerful. And then of course, if you look at the legendary lords, you can go with your spell weavers and alter your treemen for that winds of magic. And then you've got on top of that the heroes that have Lore of Life as well, winds of magic. And I mean, in my opinion, you probably don't even really need to use the others. So you've got the Branth Wraiths and also the Spell Singers that have magic users, but I mean, really the only lore of magic that you really need is lore of life. Just, you know, abuse it, use it and abuse it. Very strong. Another aspect of this faction that's just, you know, really solid. And then we should probably touch on the world roots. So again, this is something that not a lot of factions have, but using the world roots gives your armies a flexibility that most other factions don't have. So, not to mention, you know, I mean, there's so many different ways to be able to use this. I mean, if you find yourself in trouble, if you're completely under siege, you don't feel like you're going to be able to hold your magical forest, you can use the world roots to go to another magical forest and set up shop there, and you know, set up a base of operations there, and recover. It gives you time, you know, the option to potentially recover and you know, make a comeback in a campaign that potentially could be lost. And then, you know, you've got, this is a way to, you know, get in behind enemy lines as well. You know, we were at war with the dwarves. We had, you know, quite the battle with the dwarves, and one of the ways we were able to get in behind their lines was come over here to this magic forest, and then we could hit their you know, their strongholds, things like that. So just, you know, just another aspect of the wood elves as Orion that gives them a little bit of an edge over other factions. All right, yeah, I guess probably the last thing that we'll touch on is the Sword of Cain. You know, the Sword of Cain is obviously somewhat of a controversial item, but the Wood Elves are one of those factions that can probably handle using it without too much negativity. You know, the negative aspects of the Sword of Cain, you know, the loss of public order doesn't hurt you too much, because these minor settlements, let's see if we can find a place that's got different options for minor settlements. So we look at the options for minor settlements. Control +1 adjacent provinces. If you're building a lot of sacrificial lands, you can counterbalance that negative public order with this. So public order really shouldn't be too much of an issue with the Sword of Cain. You don't want to you probably don't want to hold it you know, to the point where you can't get rid of it, but you know, there are tools at your disposal that will allow you to use the Sword of Cain and you know, and not really have it affect you too much. And then if we go back to this as well, the negative diplomatic penalty is not going to hurt you too much either, because, you know, if you're at war with more factions don't like you, it's not going to be too much of a problem, because, I mean, you get that reduction in upkeep cost for all of your armies the more you're at war.
Athel, Loren.
But yeah, again, here's the just looking at the world roots again. But yeah, I think I've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to go over. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but you guys can let me know what I'm forgetting in the comments. You know, other reasons why you might think this is one of the strongest, if not the strongest faction in the game. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, guys. Who is your pick for the strongest faction in the game? Who has more traits and more abilities that would put them over the top of the Wood Elves here? I just think, yeah, I'm a massive Wood Elf fan now. I mean, this is my first real strong playthrough as the Wood Elves, and I'm now officially a Wood Elf fanboy. So, very strong faction, and if not the strongest. Yeah, like I said, let me know what you guys think. Who was your pick for strongest faction? Who could take down Orion in this regard? But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for you guys today. There's the God King of Athel, Loren there himself. We will be continuing this campaign, but obviously there's still some more work to do. We're working towards full map completion, so if you want to check out the live streams, feel free to visit the channel. We'll be live streaming this over the next couple of weeks, and maybe, well, hopefully it gets done in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, have yourselves a great day. Ragnarok out.